Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening. I'd like to welcome you to today's CUGC User Share. My name is Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and we're very happy to have back with us today Daniel Feller and his latest XenApp XenDesktop tech update. Before we begin, just go over our format really quickly. We'll have our presentation with live Q&A and discussion. Just type your questions into the question area in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to them. Also let you know that our presentation is being recorded and will be posted on mycugc.org as soon as we can get it up there. Also happy to have moderating for us today Mr. Carl Webster. Carl is a CTP and a very active member of our community. Carl, you want to say hi real quickly?
Hey, everybody. Hey, believe it or not, the V2 XenApp XenDesktop 7 documentation script is just about complete and will be released very soon.
Excellent. And Feller with us today, Citrix lead architect. And Daniel, if you're ready, I will go ahead and send over the screen to you.
Sounds good.
All right, here it comes.
I do get a kick out of the picture that we use for my sessions with me in front of my telescope. So the image on the side of the screen here I actually took about 2 weeks ago through the telescope, and that's about 2 hours worth of having the shutter open on the camera to capture that image. But hey, you're here to talk about what's new in XenApp and XenDesktop. So I've been doing these. This is volume 14, so this is the 14th revision I've actually done of this. I actually just presented in the Madison and Milwaukee CUGC meeting about 2 weeks ago, and there's been a couple changes since then. So from 2 weeks ago, I've added or changed a few slides, so we've now got a new version here. But let's get into this. I do this every time, and the list continues to grow. Each time I do this, I always get information from people out there, the Citrix people, CTPs, things I'll find online, that I get a lot of this information from, like testing information or best practices and recommendations. So I always like to give them a big thanks to all these people who've contributed in the community that I just then steal their information and put them into this deck. Stephanie did talk a little bit on the questions and answers, so I have a little FAQ as well. If you have a question, put it in the GoToMeeting window. Will it get answered? Only if Carl Webster's smart enough. What if Carl's not smart enough? I'll make something up that sounds good. Then, if you're going to ask me about future or dates on future releases, I could tell you, but I'd probably lose my job and there'd be no more tech update sessions. So, ask away, but I might get unemployed. What's your favorite color? Purple. And then we get on with the presentation. Sure, why not? That's my dry wit right there. So I always break this up into what's new, what's better, and what's best. Some of the new stuff that's come out, some of the things that have been improved, and I try to focus on one or two best practices, usually just based on how much time I have left, because there's quite a bit that keeps changing and gets improved, as these releases happen pretty quickly. Basically, it's every quarter. So this was a big deal for people who are on 6.5 trying to go to 7. 7.x. This whole thing called localhost cache. And the whole point of this is that if I have multiple sites, SQL gets expensive really fast. The 7.x platform is very dependent on SQL, much more so than 6.x. So you need to make sure you have your SQL designed highly available. That would mean I'm either doing mirroring with a witness or I'm doing always on, and those are SQL licenses. Whether it's a standard license or enterprise license, there's licenses involved on the SQL side of things, but it gets expensive really quickly. So if I start adding zones and I have to rebuild this SQL environment in each one of these zones, the costs add up fast. And if you're doing cloud, again, really there's no difference in cloud than if you're on premises, except cloud is just another zone. and your on-premises is a zone from the cloud. And again, now you have to deal with SQL database issues, the licensing costs again. So this is the whole point of localhost cache. In every delivery controller, there's multiple services. There's going to be one called a primary brokering service, another one's called a secondary brokering service. Each delivery controller does this. The primary talks to the main SQL database. The secondary talks to a local SQL Express database that's installed automatically. Now what happens here is when things are running and the main SQL database is active, the primary brokering service is used. It updates the SQL database. It sends any of those updates, every so often it'll take all the information, all the configuration information through the CSS service down to the secondary brokering service, which keeps rebuilding the local database. Now, what happens here is, all the VDAs and storefront, when they contact a delivery controller, you give it a delivery controller URL, a fully qualified domain name, and the primary brokering service is going to respond. Now, what happens is if the primary brokering service no longer has access to the SQL database, the main one, it'll tell the secondary brokering service, you're in charge now, and then all the virtual delivery agents must re-register with the secondary brokering service, and that starts using its local database. When the main SQL database comes back online, the primary brokering service sees this, tells the secondary brokering service, hey, shut up, stop listening, I'm in charge now, and everything else has to re-register back with the primary brokering service. So, that is how it works. So if you look at this now in a single site, that you're going to have multiple delivery controllers, and like I said, they're all going to have a secondary brokering service and a local SQL Express database that they're all going to manage. So that if the main SQL database fails, there's an election that happens and only one delivery controller will take over, and it's an alphabetical election. So if you call them server 1, server 2, and server 3, server 1's going to win. And then again, all the VDAs re-register with that one secondary brokering service. Now, the whole reason why that's important when I was talking about the elections, and it's all based on alphabetical, is think about what's happening here. I had the entire VDA load spread across multiple delivery controllers. There's a CPU and a RAM hit that comes with this. You'll be able to process all these registrations for the VDAs. Now that I'm doing a single on-premises, in this environment, one delivery controller in a failover situation takes over. So if I have 3 delivery controllers, that one now has to have enough resources to be able to support all of VDAs re-registering with it. So when you design the environment, you need to make sure that if you're going to use localhost cache, that your delivery controller that comes first alphabetically has enough resources to manage that extra load that's going to happen. This entire process is repeated in a multi-zoned environment as well. So imagine there's multiple delivery controllers in each zone, and the zones all talk to a single centralized SQL database. Now, if that WAN link would fail or some reason Zone B can no longer contact the SQL database, Zone B's delivery controllers will go into that failover mode and start talking with the local database via the secondary brokering service. Now, Zone A, because it still has access to the SQL database, will continue to function with the primary brokering service. So the environments start looking at different things during a failover situation like that when you have multiple zones. So that's pretty much a very quick rundown of localhost cache. And the thing to remember on localhost cache is it's that performance that you're going to have to be able to support when one of those delivery control, when you go into that failover situation, when one delivery controller takes over all the VDA registrations.
We have one question.
All right.
How does localhost cache work with satellite zones when the DB goes down?
How does it work with satellite zones when the database goes down? So it'll follow the same process, assuming, so each one of your zones has to have a delivery controller. So if that link fails, the delivery controllers take over. What you have to remember, and I don't know if I have the slide. I think I don't have the slide farther in anymore. There is sizing information when it comes to this. So, if you have a zone, one of your satellite zones, let's say, is 50 users. It's not that many, and you're only going to have maybe 10 concurrent users at a time. Your WAN connection to the database doesn't have to be that fast and that big or that fast. So you can get by with a small pipe and quite a bit of latency on that pipe. As your satellite zones get bigger, the pipe needs to get bigger and the latency needs to decrease. It's not that it's going to fail. What's going to happen is that the time it takes to enumerate and launch applications will just take longer because there's more latency involved and there's less bandwidth being able to go across that WAN link. So in the satellite zone, as long as your WAN pipe is sized appropriately and you don't have a lot of latency, or depending on the size of that satellite zone and the link, you can have a satellite zone being 50 users or a satellite zone being 3,000 users, and the whole localhost cache process just works as it normally would, regardless.
Okay.
What
version is this supported in?
I think this was 7.12.
Okay. And then a reminder, this doesn't work for anonymous users.
Correct.
And then what is the max latency supported with remote zones?
There isn't a max, not that I know of. It's all based on the size. So what I'll do is there's going to be more questions than I think we'll be able to answer in the session. So I'll make sure that gets added, because there is a blog that one of our test engineers put out there on Citrix blog site that goes through the latency requirements based on how many users you have in a remote site.
Yeah, because we've already got 4 more questions about localhost cache, but I know we need to move on.
Yeah, I took that slide out. I don't know why I took that slide out. That was kind of dumb.
Okay.
All right. All right, so the next one is the workspace and environment management. This is NorthScale, the NorthScale acquisition. And again, the whole purpose for this was we want to try to get better density and faster logon time. And honestly, it's the logon times. This is what you hear, at least I hear a lot of people complain about, that they have 30, 60-second logon times. And there's other people out there who have 10, sub 10 seconds. And like, how the heck do you do that? So that's one of the aspects of Workspace Environment Manager. So the architecture of this is you have your VDAs and XenDesktop VMs, and they're going to have the WEM agent installed on there. They will, when they boot up, talk to the WEM broker, which will get their configuration information from a SQL database. And it's not that big. The database is really small. And then all this is managed, you make all the configurations through the WEM admin console, which could actually be on the broker. And the broker's not heavily utilized either. So how this works is each of the VDAs will, when they boot, will get their config information. And then so once they're running and they have the config information, the broker could go away. It could fail and everything else would continue to function because all the VDAs out there will have a cache of their configuration. And so they'll be able to operate without the WEM broker once they receive that info. A couple of things I kind of want to point out on this. There's a lot to workspace environment management. A couple of the highlights here is the CPU management. So this is essentially trying to prevent any single process from completely overwhelming the system. So you can put a limit on how much of the CPU resource can any single process get and for how long. So if you have a runaway process, it'll prevent that from completely destroying performance in that entire server. The other aspect on this that people talk about a lot is the memory management. And this is, if you think about how most people operate, or how you work on the PC, is you launch a bunch of applications at the same time or throughout the day, and you don't shut them down. You leave these things idle, and you'll start Outlook, and then you minimize it. You don't go to it again for like another hour, and then you have a browser running, which is running all day, but you go into it maybe once every few hours or so. Then you have other applications. What the memory management portion of this is going to do is it's going to applications, they go idle. It'll move that RAM. It'll move their working set out of the physical RAM. So it frees up more RAM in the system that other active applications can use. So the test that was done, to look at how much RAM savings we had was that, so you can see the different line colors there. The blue is minimum, the green's maximum, and the orange is the average amount of working set RAM for a particular application, without WEM and with WEM. And basically what you can see is it drops quite significantly. So many people out there, I always put like a caveat on this when you test this, and WEM is something you need to test with real users, not with testing tools. So if you try to do this with any testing tool, like Login VSI, for example, the problem is that a lot of these testing tools will launch an app, do some stuff, and shut the app down, and launch another app, do some stuff, and shut the app down. You're not going to get any benefit because you're shutting the app down. Now, if you left the application running in the background and it was idle for like 10 minutes, then WEM is going to start freeing up memory, and you'll start to see memory decreases. But that's typically not how testing tools function. So I actually just found out about this. There's usually a lot of questions on this, and there was an entire session on this. It's in the CUGC share. So another one of these webinars that were recorded is posted, so there's a lot more information out there on whole workspace environment management. This was just a little quick snippet of what's new, something that's been newly added into XenApp XenDesktop. All right, so this next one goes into more or less HDX in general. So there's been a lot of improvements over this, over the past, 1 or 2 quarters. And so I want to take a step back and just look at, here's the TCP/IP model and the 4 layers and what's operating on different layers. So we look at the app layer. This is ICA. Typically what we think of when we think of XenApp and XenDesktop. So we have our ICA protocol. You've seen this before. You have all the different virtual channels in there for smart cards, clipboards, seamless windows, multimedia, and so on. And there's all these codecs, ThinWire, H.264, DCR, all these different codecs that's figuring out how do I take what's on the screen, compress it and cache it, send it across the wire, and then decompress it on the endpoint device, but to do this in a certain way that I can save bandwidth and CPU. So this entire portion of ICA runs at the app layer. Now, like I said, we compress, we do command remoting, there's video streaming, there's image caching, there's user intent, there's all these different capabilities that have been built into some of the different protocols there, like ThinWire and DCR and FrameHawk and all these other ones that take different aspects of it to try to optimize the user experience. And it comes down to a case of, do I want to use CPU or do I want to use network? What do I have more of, and how do I want to balance the environment out? So the first thing is ThinWire. So just from 7.12 to 7.13, which actually hasn't come out yet, this is the bandwidth test, or the bandwidth results we got out of ThinWire, looking across 2012 R2, 2016, and Windows 10. So there has been some significant changes just in the ThinWire codec that drastically reduce how much network bandwidth is being used again. So that's the first aspect of an HDX improvement. The second part is, I said there's all these codecs, and you have to pick. Well, now there's this whole thing called adaptive display. And so if you look at a typical web page, here's what you get. You typically now have videos, which auto-start, which annoys the hell out of me. And then you have graphics on there, and then you have text. So pretty much every website now has video, it has graphics, and it has text. All of the Citrix codecs, each one has a different strength. It's either like H.264 is really good on video, ThinWire is really good on like graphics, static images, and then overlay lossless is really good on text to make sure you get a clear, crisp view of this. So how do you pick which codec to use? Because you don't know what the users are going to use. Maybe if they're using a call center application that there's really no graphics and it's a call center, it's a call center worker, then yeah, you know what they're doing. They're only in one application, but a lot of users are in multiple applications and they have video requirements, image requirements, and text requirements. So this is the adaptive display. It basically will look at that screen and figure out portions of the screen and use certain codecs for portions of the screen. So instead of saying H.264 for everyone, it's only H.264 for those aspects of the screen where the content is rapidly changing, as in a video. And it will use ThinWire for the graphics, and it will use overlay lossless for the text. So there's a Citrix policy that you can use to configure this, to force it or to let the system decide. And again, why would you do this? It's the call center example. Users who only use a single application. The second, so now instead of deciding on this codecs, you just pick, just use adaptive display. It's one less thing to think about. The next aspect of HDX is, we've been calling adaptive transport. And so this happens, at the transport layer. So we've always run on TCP. And for ages, TCP has worked really good. And they have this whole congestion control algorithm called AIMD, which is additive increments, multiplicative decrements, which essentially means that, think about when you're on the highway during rush hour traffic. When you are increasing speed, you're doing it very slowly. You're at 5 miles an hour, then 10 miles an hour, then 15 miles an hour. And then all of a sudden you're slamming on your brakes and you drop back down to 5 or 0. And then you slowly increase your speed again, and then you slam on your brakes because someone cut in farther up. This is how TCP works. It'll slowly increase speed, and when there's a packet loss, there's a retransmission, it's going to drop back like 50%. On a LAN, this is no big deal. On a WAN, this is more of an issue. And the problem is because on a WAN, you have a lot of bandwidth, but the issue is latency. So as your latency increases, you get more of these pullbacks, and you never actually get up to the full bandwidth capabilities of your WAN, so you have a lot of unused bandwidth. So even though you have a good-sized WAN pipe, you're probably not using the full amount because of TCP. It wasn't meant for high-latency networks. So Citrix has seen this for a while, and this is how FrameHawk worked. So FrameHawk actually was based on UDP, and we built in all this thing we called FrameHawk gearing that adds the intelligence of TCP on top of UDP. So it's better to run this, on a highly latent, high packet loss network. And so there's been videos out there that have demonstrated this, over and over again. So what we've done is basically merge all this stuff together and create an enlightened data transport that gives you the benefit of that FrameHawk gearing and UDP, but for all of ICA. The problem is not all the networks are going to be able to support this because there's firewalls involved. So it's more or less an adaptive transport now that if your network will allow it, it'll use the EDT. But if you switch networks, let's say you're on a wireless network and you go to a different location and the firewall is blocking that port, or that transport layer, it'll fall back to TCP. So the port numbers are still the same, so it's still 1494, except it's TCP or UDP.
So, Daniel, what you're actually saying is that after all these years, this adaptive protocol is finally adaptive?
Yeah. there's adapt, and honestly, most of us have, we always looked at adaptive. We only looked at the app layer, the very top layer of the TCP/IP model. And so now we're looking at, they keep making improvements into the virtual channels, into the codecs and the adaptive display and all these other things. But it's like, it's the transport now which is killing us on the WAN. So let's change that. Let's come out with our own to solve some of these issues that we have on the WAN links.
Okay, so do these HDX improvements, do they have any dependencies on network hardware or configuration?
No. So all this stuff is irrelevant of any of the network cards or that. Now, so the adaptive transport does, only from the perspective of that you have to have the UDP portion of that firewall port opened. So you'll have TCP 1494, or I guess 443, or the one for CGP. But now you have to have the UDP portion side of it open as well, which might already be the case. Some people open up both, some people don't. And if you don't have it open up, then it switches back to TCP.
All right, how does it work through NetScaler Gateway?
Oh boy, how does it work? That don't remember if it works. Does it? You know, I want to say yes, but I'm not 100% sure. I want to say it does, but I need to look that up to make sure.
Okay.
So again, this is configured via a policy. There's videos out there. There's 3 different videos that have been done to look at file copy, app performance, and video performance. And what we were able to see on this is the file copy was actually impressive, was that when you go through this whole video, that using the adaptive transport that we have, a file copy took like 3.5 minutes. A traditional Windows 10 PC was like 7 minutes, I recall, and then I think VMware was something like 10 minutes. So it was a huge improvement that we had on just using the adaptive transport aspect of this. The next thing here is app layering. So I have this as better instead of new because we did have an app layering thing before called AppDisk, but this is better, and I should say this is much better. This is Unidesk, and so Ron Oglesby has this entire deck that goes into a lot of details of Unidesk, and it's awesome. But I'm only going to focus on what I think is the most important aspect of the entire app layering thing from Unidesk. And there's a lot of features, a lot of capabilities. But to me, this is what made the most sense. So the whole premise of app layering is it should simplify the admin experience. That I don't have to install Office on 20 different images. That I just put Office in a single layer. I put Visio in one layer. I put Chrome in a layer, Firefox in a layer, Skype in a layer, and I just manage that application once. And then I can give that layer to multiple users and build these, dynamic desktops. And if I need to update Office, I only update the Office layer instead of all these different images. So in theory, this works great. In practice, the problem is when you start adding layers to a machine, the performance drops. So each layer you add actually has a negative hit on performance because when it's using a filter driver to look, so when it makes a call to a DLL or a file, it uses a filter driver to figure out, okay, which layer do I have to go through to get this? And the more layers you have, the longer it takes, which means your application experience, how quickly your application responds actually starts to slow down. So from this perspective, app layering is awesome from an admin experience, but it totally sucks from the user experience. So app layering vendors, including Citrix with AppDisk, what we would say, simple, limit the number of layers you attach to a machine to maybe like 5 or 8 or 10. It doesn't matter. All of them are saying this. Citrix did with AppDisk. VMware does with app volumes. You limit how many layers you attach to a VM. So the only way to do this and still give your users all the applications is to put multiple applications into a single layer, which completely defeats the purpose of app layering, of simplifying app management. So this is a very simple example on this slide. So imagine enterprise environment. You've got hundreds of applications. How do I figure out which applications to put in which layers? How many times is Office going to be in multiple layers? Am I really simplifying the overall app management experience here? No. So what Unidesk does is what they do is they have something called a layered image. So you put everything in its own layer, and then including the operating system and including the VDA and your hypervisor tools. Then what you do is you create an image layer and say, okay, I want Windows 10, I want the Zen Server 7 XenDesktop 7.12 VDA, and I want these 20 applications. Unidesk goes ahead and builds a single image file with all those layers seamlessly integrated together. And then it gets pushed out through MCS or PVS or whatever else you're going to use. Now, if I have an update to Microsoft Office, for instance, I update the Office layer, and then I go out to that image that I created, inside of Unidesk. You have all your images are, you define them inside of Unidesk, and I'll say, okay, update all my images that have Microsoft Office, and it goes ahead and does that. all automatically for you. Now, if you, let's say you upgrade from XenDesktop 7.12 to 7.13, you simply update the platform layer. So I go back and I add a new version for that layer, install the new VDA, the 7.13 VDA, and then Unidesk goes ahead and updates all of those images I tell it to, and we push them out through PVS or MCS or some other way. So we get past all of that overhead of adding multiple layers. Because what you end up getting is you get a single VHD file that you push out instead of attaching 20 VHDs on boot up or 20 VHDs at logon, which it can do. It can still attach VHDs on logon if you want, but all these different features. But for me, this is the thing that when I saw I could do this, I'm like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's a huge management improvement as well as it overcomes the user experience issue.
Okay, a couple of questions for you on Unidesk. What if my Office layers need add-ons and need to work with other legacy applications? And also, what about printing?
So you can set prereqs for different layers. So I can say, let's say you would have a layer for those plugins instead of prereq, and the prereq would be Office. And I believe that's how you would do it. Again, Ron is the expert here, not me. I've just messed with this in my home lab a little bit. Printing, again, what's that?
Oh, go on with the printing.
Printing, I'm actually not sure on the printing side of things. I haven't gotten down to that level yet.
All right, does it work with XenServer natively?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's very. That's actually what I'm using in my lab, XenServer.
Okay.
And again, you would create a. You have that platform. So you have the OS layer, the platform layer, and the app layer. And the platform layer is your hypervisor tools and your VDA or PVS agents, all those type of agents, and you put them in the platform layer. So again, if you update XenServer to 7.0 to 7.1 or whatever, you just update the platform layer and it pushes out the new XenServer tools within your images automatically.
How do you handle antivirus?
It's its own layer. So one of the challenges with antivirus is, let's see if I remember, I got this information from Ron Oglesby's session, that because it's building a imaged layer, it pulls all these things together and it's a single image. The challenge you have with antivirus is you typically can't put that in a layer, especially at logon. It needs to be there during boot up to be part of that aspect of the operating system, that deep layer. Antivirus, because it's built into the layered image, you don't have an issue with the app compatibility from an antivirus perspective. The definition updates, on the other hand, again, that's just any same situation you're going to have with anything else. The definitions would actually be part of the layer. And again, you're not going to update your antivirus layer every day because you're going to do updates to the definitions. You probably do like on a weekly basis or something like that, just so they don't get too out of hand. But it's just a new layer that you build in.
Okay.
All right. The next thing is app tagging. So this is, you hear tagging, you're like, wow, that's really exciting. Tagging is, think of Facebook. You're tagging people in your photos. So we have app tagging. It's like, woohoo, exciting. But there's actually functionality tied to tagging, and there's more and more functionality being tied to tagging. So look at the overall architecture, or how the FMA fits together. You have VMs created. They're grouped in a machine catalog. And then delivery groups are assigned to machine catalogs. Inside the delivery groups, you assign published desktops and published applications. So what now happens, what we always have a question of, well, I only want these applications to run from a subset of VMs within a machine catalog. Can I do that? Well, for a while you couldn't. You had to create multiple delivery groups, and then you end up using more resources. There's also the question of, well, can I do the same thing with published desktops? Can I do this? Have one published desktop only go to VM1, another desktop go to VM2, and so on. These are just published resources. So for a while, you could not do this with 7.x. And then with 7.12, they added app groups that supported app tagging. And essentially what this does now is that I have an app group that you could think of as like a worker group in the 6.5 environment. And those app groups, you set that these apps in this app group can only run on the VMs that share the same tag as that app group. And you do the same thing with the published desktops. So let me go through the configuration here as well as compare it to worker groups. It might clear some things up. So first thing you do is you tag the VMs. So you can see I have a bunch of VMs here, and at the very right, they all have different tags. And then I go into my application groups, and I've got different application groups configured. And in there, I'm saying restrict the launches to machines that have this tag, and those are the tags I already put in for the machines. And that now limits those applications to only run on those tagged machines. And you do the same thing with published desktops. So you can go into your delivery group on define multiple desktops and say, okay, these desktops can only run on these VMs, or these VMs that have this tag. And in this example, the tag was just used as the VM name, but you can use anything you want. So let's go back and look at worker groups. So worker group was a group of XenApp servers that had the same published apps. And pretty simple. I add a group, I add a VM into this worker group, and it starts publishing the applications. A delivery group is pretty much the same thing. I have a delivery group that's assigned to a machine catalog, which is just a group of VMs that are publishing the same applications and the same resources. Now, what we ran into was that people would have multiple worker groups in 6.5, and they would have XenApp servers being part of multiple worker groups. So you might have a worker group for media apps, another one for Office, another one for Office Advanced. Maybe it's like Visio and Project. So those media and Office Advanced worker groups aren't big enough to warrant, completely dedicated servers. So in order to save resources, you would, have some of your worker groups belong to multiple, some of your XenApp servers belong to multiple worker groups. Just load balance across those. So we can now do the exact same thing with app groups and tagging. You can set the exact same configuration that you had with worker groups now with delivery groups and the app groups and tagging in 7.x or 7. That came out in 7.12, I believe. So that was one of the big asks on it. Now, so this is not. I actually just put a blog out on this like a week ago or so, and one of the comments I got was that, well, in 6.5, all I had to do was add it to an active. All I had to do was add a server to an Active Directory group, and then it would belong to a XenApp worker group. You can't do that in 7.12. Active Directory groups don't work like that they did in 6.5. But all you end up doing is you add that machine, into the delivery group. So 6.5, I could add a VM to a worker group or to an Active Directory group, and it would propagate. Here, you just add the VM into your delivery group. So it's just one way of doing it. So you still get the same functionality, and it's all within Studio, as instead of potentially having to go through multiple tools to do it. So that is the new app tagging feature when it comes to app groups and delivery groups and worker groups. Any quick questions on that, Carl?
Let's see. None about tagging. I sent a link to someone. Most of the questions, believe it or not, are about Unidesk. And I'm furiously trying to answer all the questions I can.
I should have Ron on here. All right. The next thing is this actually builds on tagging too, and that's what I'm saying. Tagging is becoming more important. The other challenge you have is that a delivery group, you can set reboot schedules. So that's not a challenge. That's actually a good thing. So I can set reboot schedules. The problem you have is that you can only set one reboot schedule. So if you have an entire delivery group of, let's say, 50 XenApp servers, and you set a reboot schedule, all those servers start rebooting roughly the same time, which might not be a good thing if you're running 24/7. So what you'd have to do is you have to split that machine catalog up into multiple delivery groups. Now you're managing multiple delivery groups, which becomes more of a pain. So what we can do now is use a single delivery group and use app tags or use tags for reboot schedules. So I could set a tag of Wednesday on my reboots on a certain reboot schedule and tag certain VMs with Wednesday. I could then tag another reboot schedule for Friday and tag other VMs for Friday. And only those machines that share the same tag as the reboot schedule will reboot at that time. Now,
hey, quick question.
VMs can have multiple tags. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Someone's wanting to know, can you use tagging and keywords, or are they inclusive or inclusive?
It's only tags, not keywords.
Only tags, okay.
And so I get this question a lot is, so here we're using tags based on the VM tag. Earlier I was talking about, app groups based on the VM tag. Your VMs can have multiple tags. So I could have VMs with a tag of Wednesday and Sunday in Office. And so Wednesday and Sunday might be a tag for a reboot schedule, and Office might be a tag for an app group. So when you look at naming these things, you might want to preface some of these, reboot schedule Friday, reboot schedule Wednesday, and then, app group Office or something like that. So you know what you're using those tags for, because you could start to get a lot of tags.
Yeah, I was going to say you can have multiple tags per server. So I mean, I can have an application tag on a server and a reboot tag on a server.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The one caveat is that you can't use the GUI for this right now. You have to use PowerShell. So for PowerShell fans out there, this is no big deal. But for those of us who are afraid of PowerShell, this is a little bit of a challenge. If you use Studio, it's a version 1 PowerShell command, which is over the entire delivery group. V2 PowerShell commands will let you do it via tags. So to do this, you would actually, your VDAs, your VMs don't have to be updated to the latest VDA version, but your delivery controller must be on 7.12 because it's 7.12 controller functionality to be able to do this, but not VDA. So if you're looking to implement that.
Okay, a couple of questions on the reboot.
Yep.
Can you do rolling reboots, and is there a drain option when you are using tags?
There is no drain option yet, and that's what I'm assuming you mean on the drain option is that you put it into the reboot schedule, it hits the time, and it doesn't reboot until every user is drained off.
Correct.
Yeah, it doesn't have that yet. What was the other part?
You answered both of them.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I really wish to get that draining portion on there. That's been a huge ask for ages.
All right.
All right, we're going into one of my favorite topics, PVS. So there's a new thing called PVS Accelerator. So look at PVS architecture here, and you've got your vDisk, you have your PVS server, and you have your VMs. And so the challenge we have with PVS is the network. And PVS is very network intensive here. So PVS has to read from the OS disk, and then it also has a stream down portion of the OS disk to all the VMs running on a hypervisor. So we were able to solve the OS disk portion of this, and we didn't have to do anything. Because PVS is running on top of a Windows server, we just make sure we allocate enough Windows RAM, and we automatically build in a read cache using Windows system memory. And there's nothing we got to do. We just have to make sure we give PVS enough RAM. Now, the other problem we have, though, is all the VMs that boot, they're all streaming portions of that disk across the network and across all the hypervisors to all the VMs. So even though you have multiple VMs running on the same hypervisor getting the same information, they're all streaming something different. So what you end up having here is that as the number of VMs you have increases, the amount of network you're sending across increases linearly. You boot up one machine, it's about 200 megabytes. You boot up two machines, it's about 400 megabytes. You boot up, pretty simple to understand. So now there's this whole thing called PVS Accelerator that's built into XenServer in the DOM0. So how this works is that a VM boots, and then it's going to go through the virtual switch, and it's going to send it down through the PVS Accelerator cache, which is just disk and RAM within DOM0. If the information it needs is not there, the virtual switch sends it out to PVS, and then PVS sends that information back to the VM so the VM can boot. While that information is going to the VM, the virtual switch also sends that stream information down to the PVS Accelerator to cache it locally. So now the second VM boots, it goes to the virtual switch and gets its information directly from the PVS Accelerator instead of through the PVS server. So what you can imagine is that, go back to this little graph, instead of having this linear, network requirement, it pretty much flatlines. One machine boots up, there's your 200 megabytes, and everyone else uses the same cache. So this is a way to basically try to reduce the network requirements for PVS. And so there were some tests that were done on this to show the impact. So it actually dropped PVS CPU utilization significantly. It dropped network significantly, and also increased boot up time because the information is coming locally from the hypervisor instead of across the wire. So across the board, it helped improve the speed. So there's some of the caveats, some of the things to remember with this, though. It is using local XenServer resources, local memory, and local cache. It is a XenServer only feature, but it is part, if you have XenApp and XenDesktop, any version of XenApp and XenDesktop, it's part of it. So you don't have to then buy, XenServer Enterprise. It's just part of XenApp, XenDesktop, any version when you're running on XenServer. Any questions on that?
No, that's a lot of questions on, will this work with VMware, ESX, all this stuff. So I've been answering all those saying, nope, XenServer 7.1 and later only.
Yep, XenServer only. All right. Wow, I'm actually going to get through everything in the right amount of time with all the questions. That's impressive. So I love this best practice. I use it all the time. Best user experience, you keep app and backend data together, or at least on a fast, low latency network. And so let me explain what this, this fits into the whole zone discussion. So that you have multiple zones and you have multiple resources. You have Windows 10 desktops and you have user profile data. You've got published browser applications, and you have applications with application data. So if a North American user is actually located in North America, they should get a Windows 10 desktop and the browser app from the North American zone, and then they should get another application in the European zone because the data for app X is in the European zone. This same user who now is traveling is in Europe. The only thing that changes here is the browser app. They should still be getting their Windows 10 desktop from the North American zone because their data is user data and it's located in North America zone. The app X is app data, which should be with the app. So the Windows 10 desktop, there is app data, and the app data is your user profile, and the app is Windows 10. So if you think about it that way, it's much easier to understand. You just treat a desktop as an application, and the desktop has app data, which is your profile. That is your application's data. So keep it together. The browser app, because it has no data, you should just access that whatever closer to you, geographically. So the zone preferences that's in, this might have been 7.11, I think. That if you don't do zones and you want to try to merge all the stuff together, what you end up doing is multiple published resources just with names, using like Windows 10 North America, Windows 10 Europe, and training the users to use the right ones. When you use zones, you basically consolidate all these icons into a single icon. You let the system figure that out. Wow, someone's actually calling me. So looking at the zone preferences, how this works is that it's this hierarchy. It looks at the app home, the user home, and the user location. And basically, the app home is for those apps that have app data. The user home is for things that have things that have user data, and then user location is just items that do not have any data at all whatsoever. And so it'll go through this, that's the evaluation flow, and it figures it out, and it stops once it's figured something out. So how this now works is that it evaluates this criteria and then picks a preferred zone. And then it sets up this whole connection or session creation process. And this is the order it goes. It'll try to reconnect you in a preferred zone. If it can't, it'll try to reconnect you in a non-preferred zone because it wants to save resources. And then if it can't do either of those, it'll build you a new session in your preferred zone. If it can't do that, then it goes down to your non-preferred zone and tries the session room and then build a new session. So there's some, that's the default config. You can use PowerShell to enable a no fallback on zone preferences that basically forces everything to stay in a single zone, into the preferred zone, and won't go to a non-preferred zone. So the multiple configuration aspects of this is that you create multiple zones. So I have a North America zone and a Europe zone. And then in the delivery groups, you have a single delivery group like Windows 10 and 2012 R2. Inside of those, I have multiple machine catalogs, some for Europe and some for North America. I'll define within this delivery group that sessions, right there at the bottom, sessions must launch in the user's home zone if it's configured. So that's one aspect. That's for the desktop that we would use in this example. For the app hosts, I'll go into the different published applications like AppX, and remember that's the one that had app data. I want that one to run in the Europe zone, and I only want it to run in the Europe zone. So by using those settings on that screen, I'm limiting this application to only run from the Europe zone. Now let's say Workday has no app data. I then configure the zone information. It basically says, don't configure an app zone and completely ignore the user's home zone, which means it'll just go to wherever the user location. And then finally, you configure user groups, and this defines your home zone. So these are just Active Directory groups that you define, and then you basically align it with the particular zone, and that becomes the user's home zone. So that's how all these different things kind of fit together to build in the whole zone preferences portion of this. And I actually did finish everything, and now we can actually take questions on the ones you couldn't answer, Carl.
Okay. I sent a message to David Cottingham, but he hasn't answered yet. Question was, is PVS Accelerator compatible with IntelliCache from XenServer?
Let's see, let me...
Well, IntelliCache is an NFS NAS type thing. So
it's a local, yeah, it uses local storage. I don't know if you'd ever use it for PVS actually. It was more on the MCS side, I thought.
Yeah, it was mainly MCS.
Yeah.
But they were just asking, I guess, can you use PVS Accelerator and IntelliCache on the same XenServer host? I would not see why. I mean, they're two completely different.
Yeah, it would work. I'm pretty sure it would work. I don't know what you'd get out of it though, besides complexity.
All right. Is there any benefit to this technology when booting, back to the PVS Accelerator, when booting physical machines in a lab?
No, this is just a XenServer hypervisor thing. So you have to have XenServer underneath it.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Let me scroll up. I've been answering as many as I can. All right, that one's already answered. Stephanie, someone wanted to know, will they get the Q&A along with the recording?
I can try to do that. I can go through and get all the questions and a lot of the ones that you've already answered that people can't see, and I can put those out in the forum, and then whatever didn't get answered, we can ask.
Okay.
Dan.
All right, so we're back to Unidesk questions. How does this affect PVS vDisk versioning?
You don't use it. So, boy, I wish I had my lab up and running. So let me try to explain what happens. Unidesk, when you create that layered image, and you basically you'll create a layered image template, which is essentially you're saying, I want this OS, this platform version, and these 20 applications in their versions, and that's your template. And you say, okay, publish that image, and it spends some time and merges all the stuff together and creates a single VHD file that will put it out on your PVS disk store. And what it's going to do is it's going to give it a name based on what you called your template, and put a time date stamp on it. So it'll be a full image, and then you would apply that to your device collection within PVS. Now, when you update that image in Unidesk, you again use the same template. Again, you're probably going to up one of the versions of one of the apps or the platform, the OS layer. When you publish that out, it'll have the same name, except the timestamp, which is actually part of the name, will be newer. So it might be, you might call the template Windows 10 Office, and or Windows 10 Office Productivity. When you publish that, the actual file name you're going to see is Windows 10 Office Productivity 2017-09-02 12/59/05, the full date. And so when you update it, the beginning portion is going to be the same, Windows 10 Office Productivity, and then the secondary half of that's going to be the date and timestamp, which will be newer. And then you're going to go into PVS and basically tell that whole device collection, hey, use this new VHD file next time you boot. And then if you need to roll back, you still have the old one based on the date and timestamp. So the short answer was no, you don't. But that's a long answer of it does the things, it builds those versions for you so you can roll back and go forward as well.
Okay, well,
I hope that was fun.
We had a lot of questions about how they can download Unidesk. I've been sending them to unidesk.com. They said that's only a sample, a trial. And so I asked on the Unidesk Slack channel, and it says no entitlements have been given out yet, so there is no Unidesk download on the Citrix download site at this time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either.
Okay.
What the status
Next
is.
Unidesk question. Does Unidesk, well, actually, let me ask this other one. Does Unidesk work to update dedicated desktops or just pooled? I would think it wouldn't matter, would it? It's just a layer that you're going to push out to whatever. It doesn't matter if it's a server or a desktop and we're hoping, because a lot of CTPs and questions were asked here also, physical devices. We want support for physical devices with Unidesk.
Yeah, so there is a user layer that's part of Unidesk that would, keep the user changes for the dedicated portion, and then so in theory you could update the layered image, push that out, the user layer gets applied on top, at logon, and so that could work. Again, that aspect I have not tested yet, but I believe I read about it.
Okay. Boy, if I'd known we were going to have this many Unidesk questions, we should have got Ron or someone from Unidesk on here. All right, so...
We do have two Unidesk webinars coming up. One is February 23rd.
Oh, that's right. That's right. There is a Unidesk one coming up with Jeff Pish.
Yep.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So all of y'all who've been asking all these Unidesk questions, attend that, and Jeff Pish should be on there from Unidesk, and you'll be able to get the rest of your Unidesk questions. And who knows, maybe by then we'll have more information on being able to download and what entitlements you get and stuff like that.
Did you just say all those yahoos asking Unidesk questions?
Who, me? No, I wouldn't say something like that. I said, although it's my southern drawl. That's what got you confused. You Midwesterners can't understand the Southerners.
Oh yeah. Oh, you betcha.
Let's see here. Wow, lots of Unidesk questions. Lots of Unidesk questions. Yeah, come back in 2 weeks for the Unidesk. Because, I mean, man, there's a lot of Unidesk questions here.
Well, there's the main
Yeah,
intro webinar coming, and then there's also a 2-hour lab webinar where they're going to do a proof of concept on Unidesk stuff. So there'll be two different ones in two different places.
Okay.
yeah, that's probably a good thing to tune into is those, as well as, like I said earlier, the whole workspace environment management, the North Scale stuff. There was another CUGC share on that, but that one's already out there, so you can go look at that, immediately.
Hey, we did have a question. What was the aperture of your telescope?
So I have I have the main scope, which is 12 inches, and then I have a guide scope, which is is that one 80 millimeters, I think, so much smaller. But actually, the picture that was on the first slide was through that 80 millimeter guide scope. It had a much bigger field of view than my bigger scope. And yes, it does operate when it's minus 20 degrees outside, although the PC I have hooked up to it doesn't.
Yeah, the links for the other webinars, like the Unidesk webinar, should be on the CUGC landing page. And then I believe if you're scheduled or if you're registered for these, you should have gotten an email with all the webinars that are coming up in February.
Yeah, and I put a link in the chat that everyone can see that links to our webinar calendar for all the upcoming webinars. But if you want to find previous recordings, you can go to the files section and look under user shares, and then you'll see Steve Greenberg's WEM presentation.
Okay.
Should we go through these questions and whatever we can answer, throw them in a blog soon?
Most of them are Unidesk questions. The vast majority of them are Unidesk questions.
Cool. You guys just made my life easier.
Okay, here's a question. In the zone in local host cache discussion, there was a side comment that anonymous access does not work. What in particular does not work with anonymous access methods?
I don't know. Do you know?
No, because I've never had anyone ever wanted to use anonymous sessions.
Yeah, that one I'm not sure about.
Okay. And then I guess someone was asking, are you going to have a new official Visio stencil planned? I guess for all the new acquisitions.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is for Unidesk, I'm just going to be lazy and use the app layering icon that I had.
Okay.
It still works. But yeah, I've got a couple more additions to the Visio stencils. So I think when 7.13 comes out, I'll have a new batch or a couple updates.
All right, we got a suck up on the questions here. Daniel, you're the best.
Appreciate it. Your check is in.
And now Elaine says I'm the best. But no, a lot of Unidesk questions. So please attend that Unidesk webinar. A lot of people wanting to get their hands on Unidesk. You can get, I believe unfortunately, it's only like a 7-day trial, but you can at least go to unidesk.com and sign up and get at least a 7-day trial.
Cool.
Heck, most of us guys can't commit to doing something longer than 7 days anyway, so. Oh, okay. Here's no. If you have a primary zone and a satellite zone, and the database for the site goes down, does a desktop controller from each zone get elected for VDA registration?
Yeah, it does. Um, yeah, yeah, it does. So yeah, it's just like whether it be it's the same process. It doesn't matter if the database itself fails or the connection to the database fails or the WAN link fails. Um, each zone basically becomes a separate site. So the controllers in their zone, like I said, when I said it creates a localhost cache database like every 2 minutes from the primary brokering service. And it's only for the information for its own zone.
Okay, and someone wanted to know what's the problem with vdisk versioning. Well, there's not a problem with vdisk versioning if you're just using just PVS. Unidesk has its own versioning for its layers.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I started using Unidesk, I had to figure that out. I was like, well, I remember asking Ron the same questions, like, well, how does this work with vdisk versioning or the PVS versioning capability that's in there? And it's like, we don't use it. And when I set that up, it's like, oh, I see how it's naming the disks, it's naming your vdisk, and giving it time and date stamps, and it does it with MCS as well. So quite honestly, it makes it really easy trying to figure out which of those images to use. And then also, since it's creating a full image, the PVS vdisk versioning is doing an AVHD. It's only doing the deltas. So it's like after every 5 or 6 or 7, you're supposed to consolidate back down into one to improve your performance.
Right.
Unidesk, you won't have to do that because it'll be a full image.
How long will localhost cache operate without the database?
I think forever. Everything's stored in there. Well, not everything, but enough is stored in there. But your studio will not work. So your management tools will not work, and PowerShell will not work. But people will still be able to access and use the system. Now, if you use pooled desktops where they reboot on logoff, those do not work. Because the localhost cache is not right now not able, what they call it's a tainted VM. It can't handle tainted VMs or dirty VMs. It can't handle the reboot aspect of that yet. So if you're doing pooled desktops with a reboot after logoff, what happens is when you go into localhost cache mode, all of those pooled desktops go into maintenance mode. And if you're a user and you're on it, you continue to function. But as soon as you log off, that machine is not accessible anymore until the main database comes back up and that machine gets rebooted.
Okay, hold on one second here. I'm answering another question here. Can you, on your computer, can you bring up the article that Citrix released a couple days ago about the release schedule? The release schedule for 2017?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, give me a second. That was a blog, right?
Yes. Where they said this is the first time they're doing it. They're letting us know what versions they're going to release when.
Yeah.
And someone asked about what format are the Unidesk images in. Will they work with VMware? Unidesk has worked with VMware since day one.
Yep. Do you remember who wrote that blog?
No, I don't. I know it was not Vishal because
Here we
Vishal.
go. Juan. I should know it was Juan. Yeah, here we go.
Because someone was asking a question about will localhost cache be in the next LTSR version. Localhost cache is in 7.12, so quarter one we'll see probably what will be 7.13. Quarter two will probably be 7.14. So the quarter three, the LTSR, will be based on what may be 7.14. So localhost cache, you can infer then should be in the next LTSR version.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a pretty safe bet, I would think.
And let's see. So, some people saying we make a superb combination for a webinar. And I believe that's all the questions we have that we have not answered.
Cool.
All right.
All right. Well, let me grab the screen back here. And just to remind everyone, I stuck a link in the chat window to a survey. It doesn't take very long at all. It's completely anonymous, and it helps us continue to plan more webinar content for you. And then just go visit us at mycugc.org. You can find our upcoming webinars, talk about today's presentation in the forum, start a new forum discussion, ask more questions. We'd love to have you out there. And like to thank Daniel Feller and Carl Webster for this presentation today. It was very entertaining, and hope to see you all again soon. Everybody have a great day. Thanks.